A baby is born with a brain, and the baby's brain is not fully developed. The baby's brain has started to sprout neurons prenatally, enough neurons prenatally that we even register the anxiety level of our mother. It's like we take our mother's anxiety and we bring it into our own body as a set point of normalcy. So we're just going to pause for a little minute to let that sink in. For each of you to think about your mother's pregnancy with you, and to what degree your own body received as normal the experience of her worry, upset, anxiety, struggle, lack of support, and that our bodies receive this as normal. Since there are folks in the room who are also interested in the transgenerational element, we're also receiving an epigenetic imprint of what a normal expectation for danger is in the world. So for example, if we have parents or grandparents now, grandparents or great-grandparents now, who survived the Holocaust, then there's an epigenetic imprint where the grandchildren are being born into an expectation that it's a very dangerous world. There's an accelerated response to stress. So in the United States, this is also true for our indigenous people, surviving the genocide of the experience in the United States. I imagine that it may be similar here for the indigenous folks surviving the colonization and genocide here in Australia. So there's very clear, researchable, supportable evidence that shows that if our grandparents lived in a dangerous world, our bodies are anticipating a dangerous world. And if our mother was living during her pregnancy with us without much support, or in a dangerous environment, or often when we're in a domestic violence situation, pregnancy is the time that domestic violence begins. There's an added burden upon a marriage. When the child starts to make an appearance, there's a burden for being a provider that becomes very strong, and a worry about being provider and receiving support that can become accelerated and augmented during a pregnancy. So just to acknowledge that our little baby bodies received from our generations before us and received from our mother's body expectations about the world that we were born into. I actually would like you to have a moment to talk about this with a person who is standing close to you, so that you can speak about what you might know about your past generations or about the folks, the people that gave birth to you. Okay, so here we are, we have the baby. The baby is born. The baby already is carrying the imprints of past generations and the imprints of what happened to the mom during pregnancy. So the baby is born, and the baby is born, I'm going to teach you the brain in the palm of the hand, which is a Daniel Siegel model of the brain, where if everybody puts a hand up, your forearm is your spinal column. The base of your hand here is your brain stem. Fold your thumb across. This represents the internal structures of the brain that hold memory and emotion, the limbic system. And then fold your fingers down over, and this represents sort of the brain as a whole, with the prefrontal cortex connecting to the amygdala and the limbic system, cradling it. So be gentle as you, I used to crank on my thumb. Be gentle and warm as you close your fingers over your thumb and say, hello, thumb. And be gentle with the thumb, because this is what the prefrontal cortex learns to do as a result of relationship. The baby is born hardwired for the amygdala to access 80 to 90% of the prefrontal cortex. We are born to be alarmed. We are also born to be joyful. And we're born to communicate our emotions. Culturally, we learn that it's not so good to communicate emotions, and we start to close them down in various ways, which I think we will talk about. But we have this brain then that is hardwired to communicate emotion and is soft-wired by many thousands of experiences with mothering and fathering people who let the baby know that the baby makes sense. Every time the baby has an emotional experience and the mother's face responds for just a 13th of a second to the baby's emotional experience. Let's say the baby's tired and hungry and needs to be taken care of, and the mom has been trying to take care of another child and get them food, and the baby's gotten angrier and angrier and angrier, and the baby now is just turned red and is angry, and the mom's face goes, yes, just for a moment the mom's face goes, yes, of course you're angry, and then goes to taking care of and responding to the baby, so that there's this facial expression connection that's happening, that's letting this baby's brain know, oh, anger makes sense, my emotions make sense. It's hard for us to begin to understand the extent to which we are social beings. The understanding of how extraordinarily social we are and how our brains are built by the experiences that we have is not available to the part of our brain that does stuff and gets things done. So in this moment, I'm starting to talk to you about extraordinary relationality, about the exquisite ways in which babies are formed and changed, where their brains are shaped, and their whole future life and immune system is shaped in the experiences of having a mothering or fathering person who has a responsive face. It's pre-verbal. This is happening before babies are 4 months old. This is happening before babies have the language centers developed in their brain. For the first 1.5 to 2 years, the only thing that's really growing neurons in a baby's brain is the right hemisphere, which we will learn about, the relational brain. And yet, as moms, certainly for me as a mom, I was like really focused on what needed to get done. The baby needed to be fed, the baby needed to be changed, the baby needed the room to be nice, the baby needed to sleep, the baby, was the baby crying? Did the baby need to be bounced? I was just like trying to hit the marks. But what my baby needed was relationality. So part of the question is, does the baby have a mom who's being supported enough and has had transgenerational support to be able to be in the face-to-face relationship? Because that changes the baby's brain. Now, let's say that the baby doesn't have a mom that's had transgenerational support. Her mom died early. So this mom, if my mom died early, here I am trying to be a mom, I lost my mom. I don't have this implicit knowing, this embedded knowing of relational responsiveness, which means that this baby is growing up hardwired to communicate distress, but without any of the neurons that this baby needs to help the baby cope with the speed bumps of daily life. Because this baby, the one that's supported, by the time she's 18 months old, this baby has an internalized mama that she's carrying with her. And this internalized mom is like an echo of every moment that the mom has been able or the dad has been able to make that responsiveness. Now, what happens if Kate arrives at age 60 and has not had experiences of being told in any way that she makes sense? What happens is that her brain is still hardwired for distress, but she doesn't have any of the neurons that she needs to be able to hold and nestle her emotional experience. Okay, so now we need somebody who's willing to be filmed that will raise their hand. Please raise your hand if you're willing to be filmed. Maybe we'll bring Shez up, because we know Shez. And this is the coolest thing about humans. Here's this brain wired to communicate, distress, and this brain out in the world alone meets Shez. And Shez, it happens, knows nonviolent communication. Take one step forward. And Shez begins to say to Kate, you make sense. Go ahead and say, you make sense.
You make sense.
You make sense. And so each time that Kate has an experience of empathy, of having a feeling named, and the way that we connect in nonviolent communications, feelings with needs, is a replication, a verbal adult replication of these early attachment experiences where the face communicates, yes, of course you're bored, of course you're angry, of course you're happy. There's all this communication that's happening, so that then as Kate goes along, even though Kate was a completely grown person whose brain didn't have this neural soft wiring, her brain begins to wire, and she starts to carry within her, even when Shez is gone. She's carrying Shez with her. We start to carry our empathy buddies with us. Yes, thank you both very much. If you don't have the warm, responsive mother, do you internalize nothing, or do you internalize a harsh and critical internal voice? It really depends on what's happening. The more neglected we are, the more we internalize nothing. So for example, if you lived in a house where for a week at a time, say, you received the silent treatment, where nobody in the house looked at you or spoke to you or used your name, then that's receiving nothing. It's an incredibly confusing experience for humans who are made to be exquisitely social. So there's an example of receiving nothing and internalizing nothing, and acknowledging the bewilderment and the confusion of that child is hugely important to begin to move toward healing. Does this make sense? And so if we have a harsh and punitive parent, we internalize a harsh and punitive inner voice. It's also true that we can have a parent who's very kind to us, but who themselves has a harsh and punitive inner voice that we then internalize. So you can see there are many permutations and possibilities. We humans are very complex. Another possibility is that we exist only when we reflect what our mother is expressing. In which case, then we internalize something slightly different, which is more like a sense of a combination of terrible loneliness and suffocation. Another possibility is that the mother only reflects us and doesn't have a sense of self, in which case sort of the dominant kind of thing is an anxiety about like taking up too much space, needing to exist, needing other people to really take responsibility. So whatever's happened to us has a profound effect on our internal experience of self. Is this all making sense? Okay, very good. Yeah. Shiranti.
As an older person, can I heal myself with an imaginary empathy buddy?
If I'm an older person, can I heal myself with an imaginary empathy buddy? My answer is, to some extent, with some modeling, I think we can take small steps towards getting ourselves to a point where we would be willing to have a real empathy buddy. Because there's something very sweet about real humans, but we are very creative. So we can actually find, I've often spoken with people who have grown up with a sense that a tree nurtured them, or a particular landscape, or a sense of connection with the divine, or with God, or with Jesus, or with Mary, or with the Earth Mother, or with other spiritual or divine figures. It's, I think, one of the reasons that that we can experience people being so moved by the power of a personal Jesus, because there's something there that that's stepping in to hold us in a way that compensates for not being held, and so it's a bit of a conundrum, this thing about can we do it for ourselves. My mentor, Bonnie Badenoch, who wrote the preface to my book and is the writer of the beautiful book, Being a Brainwise Therapist, believes very strongly in relational connection. I think if she were here, she would say, yes, we have to have another human. And there's a part of me that wants to say that, but there's another part of me that has had the struggles with trust on this journey, that wants to say, we really can work on stepping in with a little modeling. We can work on understanding and stepping in with how to be really warm and alive with ourselves. In a way, the story that Kate told about her relationship with her grandson is the story that we want to begin to notice for ourselves. When we feel upset or angry or sad, and we do self-empathy, do we have an inner Caleb that says, wait a minute, that was not resonant to ourselves, so that we begin. And this is something that I've been just so interested in and experimenting with, a certain impatience and with myself. And of course, because I have so much shame about getting sick, it's been an ideal testing ground for me about appearing before you with a cold and all of the levels of irritation that I have with Sarah that she got sick. How do I notice the sort of intense inner dialogue that's shaming and cold and withdrawing of love for Sarah, because for God's sake, what was she doing getting sick? For goodness sake. And so how do I invite myself into a warmth of like, of course you feel like crap, honey. Yeah. So I believe we can learn, but I don't believe we can learn in a vacuum, if that makes any sense. Somehow we need to see somebody doing it so that we can start to figure out how to do it. So I think that workshops like this are very possible places. And people have been speaking to me about the little videos. I don't know how many of you have seen the little self-empathy videos that I do. But I just received information today that there's someone in Africa who I have never met, an African man who is going through hell. And I received information today that he watches those little self-empathy videos every day as a way to remind himself how to be in a self-empathy relationship that's got some warmth and some resonance and some care. Those are free on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel with little 3-minute empathy things. And Barry.
My question is, on Friday this week, I'm going to Adelaide to meet my first granddaughter, who gets born on Thursday.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, this is a wonderful opportunity to connect with this new being. And how do I incorporate what you're saying? Like, I'm just like nervous now.
As grandparents, we have all of the best. All of the best. We're no longer responsible for the attachment style of the little one. We may have mourning that we need to do. We may need to be more fully connected with our children. So part of what we can do as grandparents is to work on the relationship with our children so that there's a clarity and a cleanness and a sweetness and a support that's absolute and unconditional for the mother or father of the grandchild. That's one. The second is we get to experience pure delight. We get to just radiate and be in delight and need nothing from the parents and need nothing from the baby, but just feel delight that the baby exists. We are so powerful as grandparents that grandparents who are warm and nurturing actually stop the track of transgenerational trauma. They prevent disorganized attachment from traveling from generation to generation. We're changed by our grandparents, particularly if they are geographically close. The closer they are geographically, the more profound their effect. But also having connections, we may have relatives now in this world all the way across the world, but warmth never goes amiss with little ones. So happily, there's no bad answer, Barry.
It makes sense.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I'll take one more question and then we'll go on. How do we find support, and how do we be with our children differently if both my husband and I came from families that didn't have the capacity for connected reflection and relationality? This is a very good place to begin. Because, I mean, there's this wonderful thing about learning about the brain, and it's why I love to combine it with nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication is such a beautiful set of skills and really can take us into relationality. But the brain science lets us stand on something. It lets us kind of have a platform that's solid for self-compassion. And one of the most beautiful moments that I remember, still moves me deeply, from some constellation work that I was doing. And for those of you who don't know what constellation work is, it's where you work in a circle with a group of people. You can use objects as well, but it's very sweet to do with a group of people. And somebody has a question or an issue, and we begin to invite people from the circle to represent different aspects of the issue, so it gets to go into 3D space, and we get to see it. And in this constellation, a woman was working exactly on this issue of disorganized attachment. And in the end of the constellation, she put her arms around the person that was representing her, and she said, "Of course you're disorganized, honey." And there was such a radical acceptance and sweetness that we can step into. We have what's happening. We have what we've inherited. But what we're starting to do is we're starting to build another space around ourselves, a space of self-compassion, where whatever it is that we've come with, we get to hold with a very deep respect and sweetness, which then makes us sort of multi-layered in our capacity and in our attachments. It gives us a whole nother layer that begins to transform our internal world and gives other people something else to be with besides the disturbed internal world. It's like we're working in and out at the same time. How is this to hear? We're very neuroplastic, and that's what's so exciting. The word neuroplastic is a word that means that the brain of humans is very capable of change.